говорить о нанесении ударов вглубь российской территории. Это серьезная вещь, и мы, конечно, самым внимательным образом наблюдаем за этим.
They first provoked us in Donbass, led us around for 8 years, deceived us that they were going to supposedly resolve the issue peacefully, and forced us to make attempts to bring the situation to peace by armed means. Then they deceived us during the negotiation process, thinking that they would defeat Russia on the battlefield, inflict a strategic defeat on Russia.
Сначала провоцировали нас на Донбассе. 8 лет водили нас за нос, обманывали о том, что они тем, что собираются якобы решать вопрос мирным путем. И вынудили нас предпринять попытки приведения ситуации к миру вооруженным способом. Потом обманули нас в ходе
Then we warned them, do not meddle in our territory. Do not shell Belgorod and other adjacent territories. Otherwise, we will be forced to create a security zone. Look at all the reports of your Western colleagues. No one is talking about the shelling of Belgorod and other adjacent territories. They are all saying only that Russia has opened a new front and is attacking Kharkiv. Not a word. What is the reason for this? They did it with their own hands.
Все говорят только о том, что Россия открыла новый фронт, атакует Харьков. Ни слова. Чем это вызвано? Они же это сделали своими руками. Пожинают плоды тогда своего творчества. То же самое может случиться и в случае применения высокоточного оружия большой дальности, о котором вы
Well, then reap the fruits of their creativity. The same thing can happen in the case of the use of long-range precision weapons, which you asked about. And in fact, this constant escalation could lead to serious consequences. If those serious consequences come in Europe, how will the United States behave, bearing in mind our strategic arms parity? It's hard to say. Do they want a global conflict? It seems to me that they wanted to negotiate in the area of strategic arms, but we don't see much desire to do so. They are talking about it, but we don't see a great desire to do it. Let's see what happens next.
For several months, even before your visit to the Central Asian countries, including Uzbekistan, delegations from the U.S. Department of the Treasury and other agencies that implement the sanctions regime have been coming to the Central Asian countries. Unprecedented pressure on the capitals of Central Asian countries in order to exclude, suppress all possibilities, all prospects of cooperation with Russia. How do you feel about this behavior? And can Russia somehow compensate Central Asian countries, including Uzbekistan, for this pressure? If I may, the second question is very quick. The news came that Russia is considering removing the Taliban from the list of terrorist organizations. How was this decision made? Why? How will it affect our relations with Afghanistan? And when will it come into force?
Значит, я начну со второй части. Это постоянно обсуждается. И я сейчас не буду это никак комментировать, потому что взаимоотношения с Талибаном, с Афганистаном постоянно на слуху.
I will start with the second part. This is constantly being discussed, and I will not comment on it now, because the relationship with the Taliban in Afghanistan is constantly on the lips of our ears. There are problems in Afghanistan. They are unconditional. They are well known to everyone. How to build relations with the current government is another question. But it has to be done somehow. These are the people who control the country, control the territory of the country. They are the power in Afghanistan today. We have to proceed from the realities and build relations accordingly.
Мы учитываем мнение каждого из наших партнеров и друзей и будем вместе формировать эту позицию. Значит, что касается первой части вашего
We are in contact with many partners, including in contact with many partners in the Central Asian region. We take into account the opinion of each of our partners and friends, and will formulate this position together.
в Латинскую Америку, то в Африку, то на восток, и всех запугивают. Это же элементы имперского поведения.
As for the first part of your question, there is nothing new here. I mean, what is happening now that voyagers are flying all over the world, to Latin America, to Africa, to the East, and intimidating everyone? These are elements of imperial behavior. And political observers and American analysts themselves say it directly. The United States is an empire, and to a large extent its imperial ambitions are connected with domestic political events. Presidential elections are coming up, and the incumbent authorities want to reaffirm their status as an empire. Many people in the United States don't like it. Many don't want to be an empire and carry the burden of imperialism. They don't want the responsibility, and they don't want to expose their country to any dangers and put it in some difficulties.
Самая большая страна, не только Средней Азии, но и по населению она вторая после России, 37 миллионов. Но, значит, выезжоры из США, как я сказал.
What's wrong with Central Asia? Uzbekistan is the largest country not only in Central Asia, but it is the second largest country after Russia in terms of population, 37 million. But voyageurs from the United States, as I said, are flying all over the world. Just recently, as you know, the Minister of Finance, I think, was also in China. What did she talk about? I was also talking about this, I think, in Minsk, that the Chinese are producing too many cars. They were talking about overproduction of automobiles. I don't think the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States is an illiterate person. It's just a twisting of the facts. What is overproduction? If we live in a market, the market regulates whether there's overproduction or not. If they buy and produce at a profit, then there is no overproduction. And how can another country force another country to stop producing this or that commodity? By force? Sanctions? And this is one of the variants of the use of force. And this is how they try to act all over the world.
Страны слабые, неуверенные в себе, особенно такие, где действуют там десятки НПО, которые кормятся с американской руки, клюют то, что им на ручку положили. Конечно, в этих странах легче манипулировать сознанием местного населения.
Of course, it is easier to manipulate the consciousness of the local population in these countries, and easier to exert pressure on the existing authorities. Where the authorities feel confident, where they devote all their activities to strengthening their sovereignty, the interests of their people and their country, they do not react to these shouts from the ocean. This is the case both with large countries and with small but self-sufficient and dignified states. We know that the Central Asian region has also been pressurized. So far, I do not see that everyone has kneeled down and is ready to blindly follow any orders from the ocean.
Они, конечно, совершают определенные американцы, там, европейцы действия, которые наносят ущерб.
Of course, Americans, Europeans, do certain actions that harm our partners. But in the end, it is also the sovereign choice of any country, how to build its policy, whether to fight for sovereignty or not, whether sovereignty has a certain value or not, and so on. In my opinion, it does, because if a country wants to be successful, it must be sovereign, even in socioeconomic terms.
Давить и подчинять интересы другого государства своим интересам за рубежом, так как пытаются делать, скажем, с этими.
If it wants to be successful, it has to be sovereign. Otherwise, the interests of another state will always be pressured and subordinated to its foreign interests. Like, say, they are trying to do with automobiles in relation to China. As for other options, fertilizers, chemistry, anything, airplanes, we are facing this. Yes, we see this. There's nothing good in it. It damages international security and the world economy.
The day before, it became known that the AFU chief Syrskyi approved the deployment of French mercenary instructors on the territory of Ukraine. You could say military, whatever you want to call it. Now it is official and finally public. And what's more, Syrskyi says that he hopes that other partners of the Kiev regime will follow the French in the same official way. What do you think about this? And how far can all this go? Allow me one more small clarification. To follow up on the question of legitimacy, it follows from your answer that until your Western handlers replace Zelensky in Kiev, you have no one to talk to in Ukraine. But I wanted to ask you, did Alexander Lukashenko also offer you Ukrainian military officers as interlocutors?
Who?
The military, yes.
Кого? Ну, к сожалению, пока Александр
Unfortunately,
Григорьевич,
Alexander Grigorievich does not command the military in Ukraine. If he did, we would have ended this conflict a long time ago and to our mutual satisfaction. We would have found a solution with Ukraine if Ukraine were now commanded by people who would be guided by national interests rather than the interests of their masters in Europe or abroad. As for the fact that there may be or are mercenaries in Ukraine, yes, we know this well. There is nothing new here. The fact that the military are now saying that they may appear in Ukraine, they have been there for a long time. We hear English, French, Polish speech on the air. We know that they are there, these so-called mercenaries. But there are specialists there under the guise of mercenaries. There was a question about long-range precision weapons. And who controls these weapons? Who maintains them? Of course, these instructors disguised as mercenaries, that's all. They are there, and they are suffering casualties. Maybe this statement is due to the fact that it is getting harder and harder for them, apparently, to hide these losses. So maybe it's time to show that they are officially present there, so that they can show these losses in a real, legal way. I don't know, maybe. With regard to the various contingents, I've already mentioned this. The Polish authorities say that they are ready to send their contingents. We hear Polish speech. There are many mercenaries from Poland. If some contingents from European countries come in together with Poles, the others will leave. The Poles will never leave. This is an obvious thing, for me at least, for sure. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's unlikely. So under the guise of free some Ukrainian units standing along the border, free them up to send them to the battlefield, keep them along the borders to ensure their safety. Nonsense and bullshit, that's all. And if they are there, they will also be in the kill zone of our armed forces. I don't think it's a good decision and a good way out. It's an escalation and another step towards a serious conflict in Europe and a global conflict. Do they want it? Well, please, we will still do as we see fit, regardless of who is on Ukrainian territory. And this is what they should know for sure.
There have been reports in the Western press that allegedly after the Swiss conference on Ukraine, Western countries want to hold another conference in Saudi Arabia and invite Russia there officially in order to show Moscow a supposedly consolidated position and to begin some kind of negotiations. Vladimir Vladimirovich, if such a proposal is made, will our country participate in this conference? And if so, on what terms?
Пока сейчас нет ответа, потому что я не знаю, о чем идет речь. Вот они говорят, мы сейчас не готовы приглашать Россию, а потом будем готовы, а мы никогда.
I don't have an answer yet because I don't know what they are talking about. They say, we are not ready to invite Russia now, but we will be ready later. But we have never refused. Not now, not later, not a year earlier. We said we are ready. We did not stop negotiating. We were told, that's it. We will not negotiate with you anymore.
Которые были достигнуты в Стамбуле. Начали переговоры в Минске, были завершены, доведены до определенного уровня в Стамбуле.
We could say that we are not satisfied with the agreements that were reached in Istanbul. We started negotiations in Minsk. They were finalized and brought to a certain level in Istanbul. It would have been possible if there had not been a signature on the extract from the agreement, which we prepared as a draft by the head of the negotiating group on the part of Ukraine.
и пытаться победить Россию на поле боя, нанести стратегическое положение. Он же прямо сказал,
He initialed it, which means that it suited the Ukrainian side. They were given the command to throw it in the trash and try to defeat Russia on the battlefield, to inflict a strategic defeat on it. But he said directly, publicly, if we had not been ordered from abroad, from Great Britain in this case, from the United States, the same thing, the hostilities would have stopped a year and a half ago. That said, on this basis, we have never refused and are ready to continue the negotiation process.
Нет ответа на этот счет, но я с удивлением всегда смотрю на какие-то.
But we do not know what and who, having in mind here in the legitimacy of the representatives of the Ukrainian authorities, will offer us at some other stages. Therefore, I do not have an answer to this. I am always surprised to see some kind of movement on the part of our Western friends and partners who say that Russia is refusing to negotiate. I have said it 1,000 times, as if they have no ears. We are not refusing. The Ukrainian side refused publicly. They paraded the agreement and refused in order to defeat us on the battlefield. It doesn't work. Now we are ready. Well, ready. Come back. What are we talking about? They want to draw something, create the appearance of world support for what they drew voluntarily themselves, based on their wishes, and present it as a consolidated position of the world community. It will not work that way. This just shows that they do not want to negotiate, but cling to get something else and turn the situation on the battlefield. It does not work. And the more attempts are made, the more losses there will be. And these losses are not in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces. Why is this happening? Today's rulers of Ukraine do not feel sorry for these people. They do not consider them their own. This is the problem and tragedy of Ukraine today. They do not consider these people their own. They do not protect the interests of the Ukrainian people today. I hope that people will eventually feel this. Good afternoon. What are we going to talk about? What questions?